Thank you very much. So, I'm going to talk today about how we work and what we need to do to achieve our best results. We work in a really complex and increasingly technical time. We work in a really fast-paced industry, and we've got to be able to keep our focus on why we do these things. And part of that is being able to retain an eye on simplicity, what it is that's simple on an event, what it is that helps us drive impact and drive emotion. I'm going to do that by taking some words from a couple of gentlemen in the past who commented and made thoughts on what we do and how we work with complexities, how we work with technical elements, and how we can achieve things by keeping that simple end goal in mind. Going to look at some of the most emotional and powerful events that are out there and seeing why they impact on people and what we need to do in order to incorporate that in our events. So the first one is this is the slide that went in earlier on today. Simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. And it kind of is, because if we keep things simple, people will understand us. They'll understand what we mean. They'll understand how we're saying stuff. So the first guy I'm going to take some words from is a chap called Herbert A. Simon, who's an economist, and he was a cognitive psychologist before linking economics and cognitive psychology was popular. He worked in the 1970s. He won the Nobel Prize. He won the Turing Prize. His primary interest was in decision-making, why we make decisions, what it is that makes us do things. He was working for organizations. He was working for corporates because those were the people who were paying him at the time. And I'd like to kick off with a few thoughts that he developed, which I think do have weight today, This is one of his. Something is as simple or complex depending on the way we choose to describe it. Now that's not talking about how we describe it to others, it's also how we describe it to ourselves. We could describe something to ourselves as simple, or we could be overawed by the complexity. When we describe things to clients, we can keep it simple, or we can baffle them with some technical stuff we may need to for budget reasons or whatever, but that's not going to win the argument at the end of the day. We need to keep it simple and keep focused on what we're going to try and achieve. You can take his work into people. He was looking at almost like chaos theory before chaos was popular. He used this thing called bounded rationality, and he was talking about decision makers. Now, if we use the term decision makers, someone's going to think of some big corporate guy in a suit making a decision to raise the oil price to make him rich and everybody else poor. But he didn't mean decision makers like that. He meant decision makers on a personal basis, a decision maker who makes a decision in an organization and why they do it. And that reflects on us because we have to find why people make decisions themselves, whether it's emotionally or rationally. But mostly, he said, that most decision makers seek a satisfactory solution rather than an optimal one. And that's what we as designers, as event creators, as technologists, we have to absolutely push against. We can't seek to find a satisfactory solution. Obviously, there's compromise, but we must always try and achieve the best one. Because if we simplify the complexity to others, how we talk about that simplicity, we will achieve emotional impact. He said this back in 1971. Now, this describes the internet today. This describes our technology today. I have constant discussions with my 18-year-old daughter who says, I can't concentrate on anything past 42 minutes because that's what the average length of a Netflix program is. So we're dealing with people who have changed how they work, how they receive information, how they digest things in the last 20 years. It affects us as event designers most of all, but it affects us because we have to understand that in our audiences, but we have to understand it in how we speak to our clients, because they are the same people, as well as speaking to the consumers. This is the last one of his little quotes I'm going to bring out for a while. One of the first rules of science, if somebody delivers a secret weapon to you, you better use it. Now that sounds a bit dramatic, I'll grant you, but my interpretation of that is it's not a secret weapon. Our weapon is our understanding of design, our understanding of technology, our understanding of how messages move. And using that whether the most complex technology in a simple way to create impact and to create emotion. We need to find a secret weapon for every gig, for every event, for every build, for every show. We find a secret weapon and we use it to tell what we want to tell in that story, whether it's from the creativist point of view or whether it's from the technical point of view. And you have to design in that simplicity quite often. There's many reasons for that, because quite often we have very technical events, but we can't baffle people with that technology. They just simply won't understand it. What we understand is not what our audience does. So we have to find a key. We have to find the technology to turn the key, and we find the simple idea that is the right idea for that space. And when we work to find the key, if we put ourselves in the position of trying to understand how others see that key, then we'll achieve the best results. So there's technical complexity. Things are very technical these days. How does that work? That's a question if you take something that's brand new tech in front of somebody, whether it's a client or a consumer, they'll go, how does that work? Because they don't understand it. Yeah, that was an amazing light and projection show. They might say that about a show which is supposed to be a meaningful drama in theatre, or they might say it about what's a product launch. If you don't notice a product, if you don't get the story that's in the theatre, if it's an amazing light and projection show, then that show has failed. And there's so much more technology these days. Mapping, digital, cross-platform workflows, pixel spaces, different kinds of Unity or Unreal Engine, gaming engines, holograms, facial mapping, 3D audio. We can go and sit in front of clients and we can baffle them with endless spiels of technology, and people will nod because it's the right thing to do, and then we may get the budget, but the show won't be better for it, because putting technical things in there for no reason does not work. Which may be a slightly odd thing for me to say as a production director for a technical supply company, but I've seen enough gigs in the past 25 years where people said, put the technical in, it'll be great, and it's not great because you don't get the end buck. It's a long list of stuff where the technical goes in sometimes, it overawes and it interferes with what you're doing, because a technical complexity does not add to the simplicity of what you say on a show. It's easy to get lost in the mix. So even if it looks beautiful, you can get lost. Achieving technical simplicity is sometimes really, really easy. Whether it's a single light, just backlighting someone as they walk through an atmospheric space, or working out how you can achieve good painted glass which will change as the light works throughout a day. Both of those things can be technically complex, but the end result is a technical simplicity for our audience, and that's what we need to look at. It's the audience's response is the important bit. There are sometimes, of course, though, when you just have too many lights. Now, that might be Christmas lights, but to me, that's technically a little bit over-complex, even for the time of year. But then there's creative complexity, when messages get muddled, when you don't really know what you're doing. And some reactions can be, why did they do that? I didn't understand it. What did that statement mean? I didn't get the message. Why was that color chosen? You know, these things are when creativity and technical don't match up. I didn't understand what was going on. If you're in front of a big, complicated UI, UX system, didn't understand it, the interface was too complicated, and I could not work out what button to press. I strongly believe there's a 10-second rule in front of a new UI, UX. If you don't understand it in 10 seconds, you walk away from it, because for most people, they haven't got the time these days. We're all time poor in wanting to do things. You get lost in the mix of creativity. You can convince yourself that something that's super creative is going to be brilliant. Even when it's beautiful, if the message is wrong, if the simplicity of what's being said is wrong, it won't happen. And what it boils down to, basically, is I, or the audience, or the people who were there, didn't understand what was happening. Some people will get it. Some people who are ingrained in the process from right at the very beginning will understand it. They'll stand in front of something incredibly complex and go, it's obvious, it's this. But I would look at something like that and go, I have no idea what that guy's talking about. So when you work some design up, you work with the technology so it works for the idea. Doesn't matter how challenging it is, doesn't matter whether space that you're doing. This was a car launch that we put in a few months ago inside a factory space. Lots of challenges, putting in rigging, putting in different lighting, putting in different LED. Steve's sitting there, he was one of the project managers of it. Wave, Steve. But the end result of that was fantastic. It was a great show. Everybody thought it was good. Client, consumer, we loved it. It was a really good exercise for everybody because the messaging and the simplicity and the technical was held all the way through. So we have to cut through the noise. We have to use our design skills to make things simple. You have to design in a simple way. Take a strong idea, take a strong theme, work it through what we're doing. Take a leitmotif, repeat the theme, put variations on it, come back to the theme. Come back to that single, one big look. And the workflow needs to be as simple as possible. It's designing in that simplicity. No matter what the complexity is, you can have cinema 4D, playback mapping, lights mapped to your content, frequency, energy, drop-offs in audio spheres, all that kind of stuff. But between all those workflows, find a simple path that links between them all, break down that workflow, because that will help the end result. And most of all, you do that if you look for a why. If you look for why it's happening, and then stay on the course of the why. And that's a short list, and it boils down to make sure your audience is always going to get it. So that technology will work with a reason. And that why is the reason. How you're going to do something will only be beneficial if you have the why. And the why needs to be simple because you have a hugely creative... I remember when I was in university and I had to read James Joyce's Ulysses. Now that's complicated. I still don't understand it. It's supposed to be brilliant. I don't know anybody who understands Ulysses. You all think it's brilliant, but can anybody tell me what it's about? I'm really not quite sure. So I'll come back to this. This was a simple idea. Launching a product launch for something that was related to a new phone, take a simple immersive mirrored room with some fiber optic lighting, LED map the tips of the fiber optics. So you can have the gladiator moment when you walk through, you wave your hand through the wheat field and the light changes. I've seen this on a pitch deck the last 10 years in various different iterations. This is the first time we got round to doing it. Now there's 22 kilometers of fiber optic, all comes off small reels. So you take it off a reel, it curls around. We had to figure out a way in 6 weeks of making those 22 kilometers of fiber optic stand up straight, but not stand up straight because if you put it in an oven to bake it so it's hard, it cracks, it doesn't let the light through. 6 weeks of R&D in how you take the LED wall, which was a wall product, put it on the floor so it's on the floor, doesn't break, make a custom interface so it sits on the product at the top. That's all quite technical, but what drives it through is retaining the simplicity of the end idea. This is the end idea, it's going to be good, it works for the product, make the technical work for that. Don't change the end requirement, if at all possible, because the technical is possible, it's just a bit difficult. Technical could be difficult, doesn't have to be complicated. You simplify the work through as you go through it and you end up with a great end result. Come back to Mr. Simon. Going to talk about people now and how people get those messages. And human beings viewed as behavioral systems are really quite simple. Our behavior might look as if it's complex, but it's a reflection of the environment we find ourselves in. And this, again, in the 1970s could apply today, you know. We all behave in a slightly more manic manner than when I first started doing events quite a long time ago now, because that's the way the world works. It's speeded up, and we have to reflect it and react to it. We have to understand that, design around it, and try and get our audiences to function within that innate craziness. All complex things start with something simple, all of them. It's kind of proven. And as people, we have simple emotional keys, which we as designers and event creators get to touch, get to play with. People appear complex, they might like to pretend they're complex, but most of the time, most of us are quite simple. We can see this now in what is our unfortunate political situations around the world. You know, the people who are playing on those emotional keys play on simple keys. Doesn't matter whether they're right or they're wrong, they're playing in those keys, and people react to them because people have simple emotional bases at the bottom of it. Simple ideas become complicated sometimes by our own need to complicate things. And as event people, we need to be honest about that when we sit in front of our clients, when we try and design something to answer their needs, to talk to their audiences. There's nothing wrong with being complicated, but we can't expect other people to understand our complexity unless they're in a position to have gone through what we have. And we've got to remember how our audiences react and perceive. We've got to remember, if we overcomplicate it, they won't understand it. To go back to the first statement, something is as simple or as complex depending on how we choose to describe it. If we choose to describe something in a complicated manner, people have to have the ability to understand that complication. If they don't understand it, they won't get it. We choose to describe it simply, we could play on how their aspects are in many different ways. This is a simple idea. This is one of the most fantastic ideas I've seen in a long time. It's a U2 tour with a see-through screen down the middle. Bono, I'm from Dublin, so I like U2. But it doesn't matter whether you like U2 or not, this was a great idea. Bono's got a camera on him from the side. There's a see-through screen down the middle of the stadium. There's people on both sides. The Edge is standing on a catwalk stage down the middle. You take Bono, you put his camera shot on the side, and position it so the Edge is standing on Bono's hand as he sings to him. That's cool. That's a cool, simple idea. There's a lot of technical complexity in that. You know, we had to make a new kind of LED screen, make a new kind of LED rigging. Putting an LED screen transparently that big down the middle of a stadium isn't necessarily easy, but the achievement of having that simple idea, that creative idea of Bono singing to the Edge but in giant format in a stadium setting, that's quite a simple idea. You can see that, then you have to play it through. And people can see that, and they feel that because it's a simple idea, well executed. This hasn't been built yet, Expo 2020, but there's some beautifully simple ideas in this. It's a word cloud on a building that people could come in and put things in and it comes up on the building, you know? It's a fantastic idea. It's simple. It's going to look simple, but it's going to impact on people because it resonates to them. They can put their own, they can get involved in it. Making people get involved in what we're doing now is a really key element. It doesn't have to be stadium-sized. It doesn't have to be an enormous new building in Dubai. You could take a pharmaceutical conference, 400 people in Vienna, pretty much standard fare for what we do. And you can work with the environments of the room. You can work with the architecture of the room. You could take something different and go, this is what we'd like to do. We'd like to make it impactful. And you know you've done something good when those 400 cynical pharmaceutical delegates are walking in for their internal sales conference and they're going, why am I here? And they walk in and they stop and they take a photo. And they go, wow, that's cool. Yeah. And you can see them smile a bit more, be a bit more positive and go and sit down. And that then works because it takes the environment of the room, it takes them a bit of surprise. And yeah, that's relatively, you know, technically complicated. We went on the recce, we said, let's use the architecture of the room and project on that. So you have to skip through how you make that work for corporate content, and you have to skip through how you make it work so it's impactful. But the basis of the thing is taking the room, using the functionality of the room, is a simple idea. There's no thing of, no, it has to be a one big screen down the end and it has to be like this. It's a new way of doing it, which worked really, really well. It's an enabler. We have to look at those sort of things, those simple ideas, enablers, and that's what we need to really push on. Now that has no technology in it, and this kind of moves us on to our last little bit. That has emotional resonance for me because I am a Liverpool fan. There may be people who are not Liverpool fans, but you can't deny there's emotional resonance for people who are. But that's where real emotion and duration and impact comes in. It's emotional. There's a story, there's a history, and it links to the fact of a lot of what humans want to do is they want to almost be part of something else. They want to be tribal, and we can lean on that as we go through. There's no technology there, but there's emotion, and that's where the creativity in the tech needs to get to. And we've been studying ourselves to find that. We've been studying it to find the simplicity. We've been studying ourselves to look at ourselves, because humans are really, really narcissistic people. We like talking about ourselves, and we like talking about other people. Our communications are movements in big crowds, what we think, what we do, how we think it. Constant chatter about that all the time. What makes us function and what excites us in technology should enable us, should help us to get inside those people's heads, to make some order of why people behave in certain ways. And that affects that trying to look trying to look for clients and trying to look for their simplicity, for their messages, how does it affect them? How do they want stuff? They want more because they see stuff. They want more technology. They may not really understand how the technology works. There's a huge amount of change. The possibilities of what we do is stretched. Every year, LED gets smaller, LED gets lighter, holograms come up. You can have exhibition holograms. Lighting gets faster. Sound gets, you can have 3D sound, spatial sound. All these things 10 years ago didn't really exist. I've been in loads of meetings where I've sat in front of a client and someone has said, I saw it on YouTube, therefore I'd like it in my conference or in my gig. You know, it must be possible because someone else has done it. The next thing you find is I'd like something new. So you pitch them the new and they say, that looks great. Could I have a photograph of it so I can show it to my boss and he can sign it off? You know, there's that simple communication to our clients is vital because they don't understand the technology. You know, there's plenty of technology in this room. I have no concept of how it works. And the further we go down the chain, there's going to be more technology that we don't understand how it works, but we need to be able to comprehend it and make it simple because we're the people who should know how it works, so we have to try and find out so we can explain it. But this hasn't been going on. That searching for a one big look, that searching for a one moment of emotional impact isn't new. It's been going on for well over 150 years. You know, this is Edward Gordon Craig in the early 20th century, 1900 sometime, building an enormous monolithic set for Hamlet. You know, that's, people are saying, yeah, you can't do that, it's crazy. He was like, yeah, well, because it'll have impact, it'll have emotion. People will get into that room, into that theatre, and they will take on board the message. And they did. It was amazing. It blew everybody away who saw it. I think. I wasn't around. So coming towards the end, what does Herbert have to say about all this, you know? You don't change people's minds, you don't affect people's minds by defeating them with logic. Nobody likes to be made a fool of and told they can't do something and then proven that that's the case by logic. It's really not very popular. You can change people's minds and bring them onto your side by emotion, by playing on those keys. And this is an important one, you know. Enlightenments, like accidents, happen only to prepared minds. I've had many production managers say to me my time about piss poor preparation and performance and many other phrases along those lines. But that enlightenment, the accident that happens when you're prepared, isn't an accident. That's what he means by that. He means it's enlightenment because you're prepared and you've thought and you've talked it through, you know. And that's our job. Our job is to design in the enlightenment. So the client's accidental moment of genius looks like their moment of genius. They take the kudos and we do the event. That's essentially almost what it boils down to. Because things are still going to change hugely. There's digital fields of immersion. These are all simple ideas. Beautifully executed, people go in and they experience an immersive digital field. It's quite complicated to do, but when the audience goes in, they take it in as a simple experience for themselves, not as a message that's being hammered home in a complicated manner. Crowd interaction. Getting crowd interaction is key to so many large experiences, so many music experiences, and corporate ones now as well. Getting people on board so they feel like they're part of it. Understanding how we do that is the most important thing in the future. And pretty much my last slide, nearly done. This isn't from Herbert Simon. This is from, I can't remember his name, he's an architect. I should have his name up there. It's called The 3 Levels of Knowing. And he's been talking about this in the last 20 years. Everyone starts out with simplicity. Everybody, because everybody doesn't know anything. As people learn things, they become more complex. But the top of the triangle, which is where we should try and put ourselves, there's informed simplicity. Because that informed simplicity is where we take that complexity and bring it down so the people who don't have our knowledge of complexity can still understand it. Whether it's a message, whether it's a picture, whether it's a technical setup, whether it's however it is and whatever it is we're doing, that triangle is really, really important because the informed simplicity is where we should aim to be. And that's it. Thank you very much. Oh, there's questions. 4 questions. Can complex be okay so long as it appears simple? Yes, absolutely. That's entirely the point. If it's complex, but the people who understand the complexity make it appear simple, that's the point. That's exactly correct. Is the aim to make simple look expensive or just to keep it simple and appealing? Well, if you can sell simple looking expensive but still keep the message, then great. Good on you. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. It's not an aim. The aim is to get your event looking great, is deliver a good, strong emotional impact. If you do that by making simple look expensive, then please do. I think that's great. But it's a bit like in Bake Off where they make a really, really simple brownie. It better be a really good brownie if there's no decoration on top. Because that simplicity is sophistication, but simplicity basically isn't its own reward. If it's simple, it still has to be strong, still has to be powerful, still has to be thought through. Complexity, I think the reverse is true. Complexity is definitely not its own reward, because complexity, you have to simplify to deliver it well. If you've ended up with an unwieldy behemoth, how do you strip it back to its simple elements? Well, you just have to go into those steps through the workflow. You just have to try and break it down and go, what am I trying to achieve? How do I achieve it? And what are the steps to do it? Things can snowball into bits that somebody else in the chain doesn't understand, and it does become unwieldy, does become a behemoth. But the only way of breaking that down is to break it down. You have to go through the steps. What is the digital? What is the practical? You can go into the elements if it's a live build. What is the live build timescale? When do I have to deliver something? It's just getting granular. And when you have something that's really complicated, getting granular with it is off-putting, because quite often you don't know where to start. Or I come into the office someday, 40 emails and 20 things I have to achieve straight away. I look at it and I go, I don't know where to start. The only way to start is to start, unfortunately, because it's not going to start by itself. You have to just get up there and do it. What does simple look like in events? Simple should look like, well, I mean, we could go back to, there's two ways of looking at it. Simple could go back to that dancer model backlit by the spotlight in a hazy atmosphere. That's quite simple, but it could be powerful in the right context. Simple should look like something that's delivered well and looks like it's delivered without too much stress for people, without people running around, getting stressed, working 24-hour days. You know, there's simple is sophistication, simple is an ideal, but it's not something that happens by, it's a bit like starting that workflow with the behemoth. It's not something that happens by itself. To get that informed simplicity, you have to go through the complexity, because otherwise you just stay at the simple bit at the bottom. And I don't think anybody wants to do that. We want to get to the point where we understand the complexity and then can deliver it so it looks simple. I think that's it. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed it.